Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. Jung wrote those words in Memories, Dreams and Reflections, his most personal work. A book written not for the academy, but from the depths of one man's interior life. And in that single sentence, he named something that most of us have felt, but never been able to articulate. That there is a particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It doesn't arrive in empty rooms or silent evenings. It arrives in the middle of conversations, at gatherings, in relationships that by every external measure should feel like enough. It is the loneliness of being present, yet somehow unseen and unheard. Not because the people around you are cruel, but because the part of you that most needs to be known has never fully made it to the surface. From the earliest stages of life, the individual faces tension, the tension between who one actually is and who one must become in order to be accepted. A child arrives in the world without pretense. Every need, every emotion, every impulse expressed without filter or concealment. But the world does not receive this totality. It rewards certain expressions and punishes others. It welcomes particular aspects of the child's nature, while meeting others with disapproval, silence, or rejection. And so the child learns, not through conscious decision, but through the accumulation of experience, that certain parts of the self are welcome and certain parts are not. This is the inevitable friction between the individual psyche and the demands of the collective. Every culture, family, or social structure requires a degree of conformity. The self must be shaped to fit the world it inhabits. Jung called the mask we construct for the world the persona. The persona is not inherently negative, it is a necessary adaptation, a functional interface between the inner world and the outer one. But the persona carries a profound danger. When worn long enough, it begins to feel like the self. The distance between the persona and the face beneath widens, quietly, gradually, until the individual can no longer clearly distinguish between the two. What began as adaptation hardens into identity, and yet the aspects of the self that are repressed do not disappear. They retreat. They move beneath the surface of conscious life into the shadow. And here the loneliness begins, not in isolation, but in the quiet, persistent experience of moving through the world as a partial self, engaging with others from behind that carefully constructed mask, receiving connection, warmth, even love, but always with the awareness that what is being loved is not entirely you. It is the loneliness of the unwitnessed interior. Beneath the persona, something remains, unacknowledged and unexpressed, pressing quietly against the surface of conscious life. Jung called it the shadow and described it as everything that could not be accommodated by the persona, every emotion that was deemed too intense, every desire that was considered inappropriate, every aspect of the self that the collective could not receive. These do not simply vanish. They are pushed beneath the threshold of conscious awareness into the deeper layers of the psyche, where they continue to exert their influence unseen. And with every act of suppression, the shadow deepens. Fed by every moment the authentic self is denied expression, it accumulates weight and density in the unconscious. And it makes itself known, not directly, but obliquely, in the emotional reactions that seem to arrive from nowhere, in the feeling of carrying something unnamed, something that presses against the surface of conscious life without ever fully breaking through. In the patterns we cannot seem to break, the substances, the distractions, the compulsions we despise in ourselves yet return to, each one a muffled attempt to quieten what was never allowed to speak. This is where the loneliness deepens into something more fundamental, because the shadow does not only contain what others rejected in us, it contains what we have rejected in ourselves, the parts we learned to be ashamed of, the parts we buried so early and so thoroughly that we can no longer remember they exist. And yet they are there, constituting a significant portion of the total personality, a hidden part of the self that has never been witnessed, not by others and not even by oneself. And there is no loneliness more profound than that, the loneliness of self-estrangement, of sensing, however dimly, that the life being lived at the surface is only a fraction of what is actually present within. Jung believed this was a common condition of civilized humanity, the price exacted by collective life from every individual who enters it. Jung did not regard the shadow as a problem to be eliminated. He regarded it as an invitation. Most of us, when we encounter something uncomfortable within ourselves, move away from it. We refine the mask. We manage the surface more carefully. We become more skilled at performing the version of ourselves the world expects. But Jung understood that this moves in precisely the wrong direction. Every effort to suppress the shadow deepens the estrangement from the authentic self. Every refusal to look inward tightens the very condition we are trying to resolve. The work he prescribed was simpler, yet far more difficult. To turn toward what has been avoided, to look at the repressed, the denied, the long-buried aspects of the self, not to judge them, but simply to witness them. That witnessing changes something. As the shadow is met with curiosity rather than shame, the inner conflict that never had a name begins to ease. The self that was always present beneath the persona, the one that carried the contradictions, the desires, the depths that were never given expression, begins to be known. The loneliness that has been carried, that persistent feeling of being unseen, unknown, unheard, was never entirely about others failing to see us. It was equally about our failure to see ourselves. The parts pressing against the surface, asking to be acknowledged, were always our own. To begin knowing the shadow is to begin dissolving the loneliness at its root, not because the outer world suddenly understands us more completely, but because we have begun the far more fundamental work of understanding ourselves. Jung understood that the reconciliation with the shadow was not an endpoint. It was the beginning of a longer, more demanding process, one he termed individuation, the gradual, often painful journey toward becoming who one actually is. Not the self that was shaped by collective expectation, not the self that learned to perform for approval, but the self that exists beneath all of that, whole, complex, and irreducibly unique. Jung did not frame individuation as an obligation or a therapeutic procedure. He framed it as something rare, something that most people, absorbed in the demands of collective life, never fully undertake. And the cost of not undertaking it always returns us to loneliness, because the self that has not been inwardly explored remains unknown, and the unknown self cannot be genuinely communicated. It cannot be offered to another person. It can only be performed, and performance, however accomplished, cannot produce the depth of connection the psyche actually hungers for. The person who has not made the inward journey has nothing real to bring to another. Genuine communion between two people is only possible when both have developed a relationship with their own depths, one that precedes and makes possible any relationship with another. This is the resolution Jung pointed toward, not the elimination of loneliness through more connection, but the transformation of loneliness through the inward journey into something it was always pointing at. The recognition that the ache of feeling unseen was never asking to be soothed by the external world. It was asking for the one thing that could actually resolve it, the courage to finally be known. And from that place of inner knowing, something shifts in how one moves through the world. The need to be understood by everyone loosens its grip. The performance of the persona becomes less compulsive, and in its place something quieter and more durable emerges. The capacity for genuine presence, for offering to another not a carefully constructed surface, but an actual self. It is only from that depth that real connection becomes possible, not the shallow connection of shared distraction or mutual performance, but the rare, profound encounter between two people who have both had the courage to go inward, and in doing so, have become someone worth truly knowing. Jung spent his life pointing toward a single truth, that the unlived interior does not remain silent. It speaks, through symptoms, through dreams, through the persistent ache of feeling unknown in a world full of people. It is the psyche's most honest signal, pressing against the surface of conscious life, asking to be taken seriously. And there is only one response that honors it: the journey inward. That journey begins not with a dramatic transformation, but with a single act of honesty. The willingness to sit with the loneliness rather than flee from it, to ask not how to make it stop, but what it is trying to say. Because beneath that ache, beneath the feeling of being unseen and unknown, something is waiting. Not suffering, not emptiness, only depth. The depth of a self that has never been fully inhabited, that has been pressing against the surface, patiently waiting for the moment you finally turn toward it. So ask yourself, is your loneliness asking you to find more people, or to finally go deeper into yourself?